We're ready to roll. Good morning, Robert. Okay, we're wrapping up our discussion. So the questions to be answered, which we asked way back at 20 months ago, which we're going to, God willing, answer now, are as follows. The conclusion of the entire Mishnah talks about the reward, or so it seems, for the observance of Torah and mitzvahs. And the question is, this shouldn't appear at the end. This should appear at the beginning as a motivation to observe. And moreover, it should be hoped that once one has observed all of the commandments outlined in the Mishnah, one is no longer motivated by reward, but rather, as the Mishnah teaches in Pirkei Avos, to serve the master for no reward. So at the end of the culmination of the entire Shas, all the Mishnayos, that's when we're told about reward. So the Rebbe explains it's not talking about reward. It's actually talking about the result of Torah mitzvahs that we can only appreciate once we have studied and observed to whatever we can, whatever applies to us, all the mitzvahs. Let's see what is stated. What is the result? Reward/result. It is reward in the sense of the reward of the mitzvahs and the mitzvah itself. In that sense, it's a reward, but not something extraneous. It's look and appreciate, and only now you can appreciate what you have accomplished, what mitzvahs do. And what is it? So there were two statements. Rebbe and Levi said that Hashem will bequeath. We asked the question, bequeath? It's earned. It's not an inheritance. So why does he use the language bequeath? This will be answered in a moment. And then he says to each tzaddik and tzaddik. Just say to each tzaddik. Why repeat the word tzaddik twice? That will be answered. Then he goes on to say 310 worlds. But we know from another Gemara that the 310 worlds are the vessel to receive God's blessing, God's handful. We looked at those sources at the beginning of this course. So why focus on the 310 worlds which is finite? 310 is a number when the revelation/award is infinite. So why focus on the vessel? And then he goes on to say, and he brings a proof text, it's a proof text from the book of Proverbs, which means to bequeath to those who love me, there is. He's alluding to the word there is, yesh, which is an allusion, yud shin, to 310, which supports his statement that each tzaddik will be bequeathed 310 worlds. We're asking why that's the ultimate, but that's aside from that. So he brings the text here. Good. But then he goes on to say, I will fill their storehouses. Why bring the rest of the verse? It's not germane to the proof text. And furthermore, it compromises it. Because when you're saying I'm going to fill their storehouses, again, you're pointing to a limitation of the reward. As much as their storehouses can contain. And we're human beings, even a tzaddik. And yet surely the reward is infinite. So it's entirely puzzling. And then the Mishnah concludes with a statement from Yeshua ben Levi, who said that God didn't find a keli, a vessel, to receive beracha for the Jewish people other than peace. The question is, we already have the vessel. The vessel are the 310 worlds. So what is this? And what is meant by God couldn't find? Searching, God searching? Just say, the vessel for blessing is peace, the greatest vessel. The ultimate vessel. Why does Rebbe ben Levi, why does the Mishnah use this very strange language? God didn't find, as if it's not obvious. God had to search for it and it's not found in the obvious place. What does this mean? So all of this is now going to be understood, plus many other questions that we had in the past. And the main question is the connection to the very previous and final statement of the tractate. It says Masechta Uktzin, which is one of the most difficult tractates of the entire Talmud. It's only a Mishnah. It's not discussed at all in the Babylonian Talmud. And there, the final teaching before this reward/result quotations from Yeshua ben Levi and Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta talked about the peace. The final statement was an argument between Shammai and Hillel. about, remember, without repeating the whole story now, about when honey in the honeycomb, when halachically is it treated as, at which point is it treated as a liquid, as opposed to a solid, just entirely different set of laws, in terms of laws of impurity and purity. Liquids have one set of laws and solids have another. And honey, mind you, within liquids has a special status. It's one of 7 liquids that any foodstuff coming in contact with it makes that foodstuff susceptible to contracting ritual impurity thereafter, even if the honey is removed or the water or any of the other 5 liquids. So there's many halachic, tremendous halachic ramifications to honey in the honeycomb, treated as a solid or as a liquid. So the argument is, the dispute is, Shammai says, from the moment the person considers, the farmer, the owner, considers to remove the honey, it's already deemed a liquid. Or another view says, the moment that he starts the process of smoking the bees out, even before having actually removed the honey. And Hillel says, no, as long as the honey is in the honeycomb, notwithstanding your intention, notwithstanding even the process of smoking out the bees, you've already actually lit fire under the honeycomb. If you haven't physically removed the honeycomb, and here it is in its liquid state, it is not considered a liquid. So we explained at length over the last few weeks, consistent with their different world views in terms of the whole purpose of creation, and whether it is koyach or poel. This affects their views on many halachas. Sometimes the halachas, they don't argue about every halacha, because sometimes, most often, the Torah is clear which position we are to take with respect to this halacha. When the Torah leaves it open, that's when their dispute is. And the dispute is cause. Do we look at cause as the real reality, or the effect, the result? Consequence. We explained at a deeper level, quoting from another argument in the Gemara, Tractate Erevin, Tractate Chagiga. Their argument boils down to, on a profoundly metaphysical or spiritual level, what's the purpose of mitzvahs? To fill us or to dissolve us? Beis Shammai says the purpose is ascent, gevura. The purpose of mitzvahs is to dissolve the world and ascend to heaven, as it were. Dissolve the world out of its sense of separation, like fire, gevura, Yitzchak, fire consumed on the altar, ascending heavenward, sacrifice. And Beis Hillel says the purpose is the direct opposite. The purpose is to suffuse and engage and fill the world with godliness. So it's this way, that's Hillel, Chesed, or Gevura, that way. Very different perspectives. This was elaborated upon at length over the previous weeks. Hence the famous argument, whether it's better for a person to have been born or not. Shammai says no, Hillel says yes. Meaning, Shammai says you don't come down here for you. The soul doesn't come down for the body. Born means soul coming into the body. The soul comes down not for its own growth and expression, but the soul comes down to fulfill the divine purpose. Comes down to the mission to dissolve creation, which means to cause creation to ascend to its source. And Hillel said it's better because the soul comes down for its own actualization and fulfillment and realization and engaging of the body, etc. So very different views. Is the objective sacrifice? Is the objective engagement, suffusion, fulfillment, growth? To be or not to be, to quote. L'havla elef of dollars. Hillel said the purpose is to be, and Shammai said the purpose is to overcome, not to be. Beyond the ego or engage the ego. Okay, this we elaborated at length over the last few weeks, and we saw how this halachic perspective, koyach versus poel, actual versus potential, has tremendous ramifications in many areas of law. What's the deadline for Kriya Shema? How do you light your Hanukkah candles? How do you fulfill the mitzvah of the Haggadah Seder night? The laws of the Nida and the Ziva, and the laws of intimacy and purity and impurity. and other ramifications as well. What we didn't do, friends, frankly, was we didn't explore each argument and explain why there's a reason. In other words, why argue in all these cases? If we know their position, we can apply them ourselves. You can't, because in each case, there's an argument to say this would be different for one or the other that is so nuanced, we need really to sit down for a few hours at a stretch and do it. But at any rate, what emerges at the end is, at least this basic understanding, that what is the objective, which is the virtue. The virtue lies in Hillel, in the source, and in Shammai, the virtue lies in the source's actualization. Okay, and having said all of this, we're going to explain all of the questions we just began with now, and we are going to finish it. In Hashem. So, the big chidush, the big news of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who said that God will bequeath every tzaddik and tzaddik. Now, we're going to answer right now why he says every tzaddik and tzaddik. The whole tzaddik and tzaddik. Just say tzaddik. Every tzaddik means every tzaddik. Why say it twice? Of course, we have the answer now. Because he's referring to both the path of Shammai and Hillel. Now, what's he saying? He's saying something we would not know. It's a tremendous chidush, tremendous revelation, tremendous insight that comes at the conclusion, can only come at the conclusion of having learned and committed to and observed as a tzaddik all of Torah and mitzvahs, whether the position of Shammai or Hillel. The end of it comes an extraordinary statement from Rabbi Shua ben Levi, complemented by Rabbi Shua ben Korcha about the notion of peace. What is it? And that is as follows. I would assume, understanding, and a correct conclusion and assumption, understanding the position of Shammai, understanding the position of Hillel, that according to both views, the net result of God's purpose realized, of God's revelation, whether it's because it's coming this way or we have ascended, would mean that the neshama, the human being, the Jew that did it, would be incapable, would be impossible for us to experience in that divine revelation the true infinite revelation of God. Let's understand. There are 7 names for Hashem. The 2 primary names, as we all know, which appear in every bracha, is Hashem and Elokim. The Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim. Yud Kei Vav Kei is so holy that we don't even pronounce it the way it's written. Because to pronounce means to summon it forth, to call, and it's such a lofty revelation that it cannot be revealed. What is it? It's God's infinite revelation. That's Yud Kei Vav Kei. Elokim, which means a judge, and has a numerical value of the word Hateva, both add up to 86. Bereshis Bar Elokim. So this refers to God's finite and descriptive revelations. His divine attributes, the midas. The word midah, friends, means a measure. A measure. It's a measurable revelation of the divine. It can be described, it can be apprehended, it can be experienced, it can be mirrored. But God's infinite. Infinite means beyond. So I would assume that the divine revelation, the net result, let's take each view. According to Hillel, the whole point is that we fulfill and suffuse creation. Creation is limited. So we're going to experience the full result of our growth and the level of the divine that we accessed and we drew down into the world. Obviously, what are we drawing down into the world, the finite world? Only that level of the divine that can be contained by the finite world. So that's the level of the divine will or the divine manifestation that we can access, a limited level. Full, beautiful, but limited. Limited to our state, a refined growth, elevated, wonderful state that we've achieved through observing all of the mitzvahs, growing and expanding and deepening. But at the end of the day, it's still finite. It's all part of the world, consciousness, the world. On the contrary, we're filling the world. So the whole world has been filled. Great. But if the world is filled with godliness, It's that level of godliness that can fill the world. A parallel finite level, Elohim, but not more. Even Shammai. Shammai says, it isn't about you. You were better off not being born, the soul coming down to the world. Why did you come down? That's Shammai's view. Because you came down because God has a purpose, a desire, and that's to come down to the world and dissolve it, overcome it. Mitzvah by mitzvah, elevate the world. Then bring it back. Go back to the source. But you're better off not having left the source in the first place, as far as the soul is concerned. So even according to Shammai, since it isn't about you, it's about, to begin with, never was. It's about Hashem's purpose in his clear words, better for you, soul, not to have come down to the world. So therefore, the end result is, obviously, his will is fulfilled. It was never yours. That's beyond you. You can have an acknowledgement. Thank God he fulfilled his will. But to experience that will, totally beyond the ken of the soul, period. It was never about you to begin with. You came down to the mission despite yourself. So the fulfillment of his pleasure, as it were, God's desire, is something you can't be privy to, because it wasn't about you, and it's about his plan that was despite you. It was all along despite you, says Shammai. You, soul, better, you shouldn't have been born. So being despite you, you'll recognize that which is beyond you is being fulfilled, but still beyond me. That's what I would think. So I would think that according to both views, either view, the final result, the final connection, mitzvah, which means connection to Hashem, is limited, not absolute, not according to Hillel, not according to Shammai. So here comes along Rabbi Shua ben Levi and says, no, that God is going to bequeath to every tzaddik in tzaddik 310 worlds. And then he brings the verse as it says, lahanchil, to bequeath, oyavai, those who love me, yes, there is an allusion to 310. The first thing we have to appreciate here is answering our question, why does he say bequeath? This is earned. You did the mitzvahs, the reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah, it's earned. Now we have the answer, because what we're going to get is far more than we did. Like an inheritance, a child, even day one old, inherits the full inheritance bequeathed by the predecessor without having worked for it. So he's hinting very strongly, no, you're not, each Jew, whether the path of Shammai or the path of Hillel, it's not that you're going to get only a limited, as we explained, experience and connection and intimacy with God. Only Elohim. No, it'll be bequeathed to you, and you'll have an experience, even though it's beyond our ken. You will experience God's infinite being. And moreover, here comes the incredible point. In the halach of inheritance is that the one who inherits, the child, is virtually b'mokim ha-moirish. The yoirish is in the place of the moirish. It's not somebody else. If I sell you something, you don't become me. My object went from me to you. But inheritance is different. Inheritance is like your extension of me. I'm literally, the one who inherits is in the place of the one who inherited. It's a different halachic construct, inheritance. As opposed to a sale, which has its limitations. It can be revoked. So what's being said here? That we're going to inherit? That means we'll literally inherit who? The illusion here is Hashem. We're going to experience God for who God is. How is that possible? Finite human beings. So we're going to run it ahead. Rabbi Shua ben Korcha said, and we'll come back and fill up some details. Let's go ahead. The final teaching was that Hashem didn't find any vessel for blessing other than peace. And he brings the pasuk, Hashem ba'oz li'ama yitin, God gives strength to his people. Hashem yevarech es ame b'shalom, God blesses them with peace. What's he saying here? First of all, what's peace? Peace you need to reconcile opposites. That's what's happening here. Is Shua ben Levi just said that a human being, whether physical in a body or even in a soul, is going to finite at the end of the day, is going to experience that which is totally beyond him. They're at odds. The infinite and the finite are at odds. How is it going to happen? Peace, the ultimate peace between heaven, Hashem, more than heaven, Hashem's essential infinite will, and the soul, the human being that carried it out. We will experience it. That's the true peace. The reconciliation of the ultimate opposites. The ultimate opposites, which in their natural state are irreconcilable, it's finite and infinite. Ein Sof, the infinite one, blessed be he, and finite creation, even spiritual creation. And yet they will fuse. That's the ultimate peace. Hashem will give us the strength to be able to retain consciousness and yet experience the infinite, which we can't even begin to imagine what that's like today. But that's the result of our mitzvahs. That's the result of our mitzvahs. And that's what he meant by Hashem will, God has to search for this, because it doesn't exist in the ordinary realms of heaven. Heaven says the higher you go, the less compatible. God goes beyond heaven to his very essence. Listen carefully, because Hashem's very essence is beyond infinite and beyond finite. And therefore the fusion can happen, the ultimate peace. Finite and infinite can become one. Man can be privy to and experience absolute God. The ultimate connection that he made, the real essence of the mitzvah that he forged through the performance of mitzvahs, whether Shammai and Hillel, which we'll soon get back to in a moment. And that's also an allusion to the word yesh. Yesh means 310. On the one hand, 310 is a number, which means finite. But the yesh, in the words of the Ramban and the Rambam and Pirush Mishnayos, the word yesh means there is. The only one it can truly be said, there is, because he is, not because of anything else, is God himself. He's the true yesh. It's called the yesh amiti. He's the true there is. Nothing else is true the way he is. We are because he is. Because he wanted to create us. We are created. We are a result, a consequence of his will. Only God is the true yesh, the true being, the yesh amiti. That's hinted to here. Lahan in the 310, it's hinted to here as two opposite things. Yesh, the true being, beyond infinite, and because God's beyond infinite, he can have a number, us, contained to 310 worlds, experience him and not implode. Infinite and finite fusing together, because he's beyond both and the equal source of both. So that's the meaning. That's the meaning of what Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, that in the future Hashem will bequeath. It's beyond us. It's an inheritance, despite the fact that we only get it after having done what we have to do. L'chol tzaddik et tzaddik, this path or that path, 310 worlds will experience it in our finitude, but it's going to be yesh, 310, alluding to the very ultimate being who is beyond infinite, beyond finite, and therefore this impossible can happen. Now to go further and deeper, it's very deep now. What emerges, what is being conveyed here, friends, at the very end of Shas, the end of Mishnah, the end of the 6 orders of the Mishnah, the final, ultimate, deepest statement of what mitzvahs have done and do, and can only be appreciated and realized once you have done so, which is why it appears at the end. And that is the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel we mentioned earlier historically have their time. The halacha is basically like Hillel now in the present era, all the way, till Moishe Mashiach. The Arizal says by Moishe Mashiach, when Mashiach comes, then halacha will be like Shammai. But there's a third epoch. Post Moishe Mashiach. Post the Messianic era. It's referred to as the era of the revival of the dead, Tchias HaMesim. In fact, it's an era that the prophets did not speak about. About this era, it says, Ayin le'rosa, it's a verse. Ayin le'rosa le'kim zulasecha. No eye has seen it, but you God alone. Friends, then, let me make the statement and try and explain it to you. Then the halacha will be like Shammai and Hillel simultaneously. How's that going to look? What does it mean? So let me explain. There are two levels to mitzvahs in general. The basic level that we are familiar with is a mitzvah has a purpose, has an agenda. Two agendas, Shammai agenda, Hillel agenda. The objective of the mitzvah is to dissolve the world, hence we relate to it at its source. We're going this way. The agenda of the mitzvah is to engage the world. That's Hillel, but it's an agenda. It has a purpose. The big question is, so once the purpose has been achieved, why are there still going to be mitzvahs? The world's been fixed. Tikkun olam. It's been fixed. Either this way, that way, whatever. As we say in the Aleinu, l'saken olam b'malchus shin daladu, the whole objective is to fix, perfect the world and bring about redemption and so on. So the question is, the Gemara says unequivocally, although this has to be explored, this is another extraordinary talk of the Rebbe, or a series of talks. Mitzvahs, one view says mitzvahs will be nullified, one says it won't be. The Rebbe reconciles all the views. The bottom line is mitzvahs in terms of an agenda, it has to do something nullified. It's been done. Mitzvahs betelis losid lovay. The need to command the mitzvah is over. No need to command mitzvahs. You've got to do this, whatever the objective is, to achieve this or to achieve that. Shammai Hillel is over once it's done. But the mitzvahs remain. Why? Because there's a deeper agenda to the mitzvah, which is beyond agenda, not agenda. The mitzvah is purely the expression of God. Do the mitzvah not to achieve, fix, elevate, grow, suffuse, surrender, fire, water. No, beyond that. Ultimately, the post-Messianic era, it will be doing mitzvahs not for any agenda, simply the natural expression of God. That's all. Now, to understand this a little bit, what am I saying? Mitzvahs are rooted in the essence of Hashem. The word Anoichi says the Gemara, which is the opening word of the Ten Commandments, says the Gemara Masechta Shabbos, where it deals with the whole giving of the Torah. It's an acronym for Onon Nafshi Ksavis Yehovis. Simple meaning is I myself wrote it, gave it. Said the Baal Shem Tov, the deeper meaning is of the Gemara, I wrote myself into Torah. My very essence. The Zohar says it explicitly. It says on the Parshas Trum, which we're going to read in a few weeks, the pasuk says, "V'yikli trum, you should take from me truma," referring to the donations, the contributions to building the Mishkan. Take from me. You give, you don't take. Should have said "V'yitnu li truma." What's "v'yikli"? So the Zohar says, when you do mitzvahs, yikli, you take me, and it's hinted in the word truma, which is Torah mem. Torah given for over 40 days, you are taking through Torah mem, li, you take me. So, let me ask you a question, my dear friends. Is there a reason for God's existence? Does he exist for a purpose, for an agenda, God forbid? Of course not. If there's a reason for God's existence, forget this God that you're worshiping and worship the reason, because that's why he exists. Of course, that's nonsense. God is Yesh. He's the Yesh Amiti. He is because he is. It's the best we can say. No reason. So to mitzvahs express him at their core essence, they're not a means for an end. They simply express him. His will. So therefore, in the ultimate era where the Yesh Ha'amiti is revealed, it's going to be Chol Tzadik V'Tzadik at the same time. Do it Shammai's way, do it Hillel's way, beyond the agenda dimension, the direction, this way, suffuse, engage. It's beyond that. It's the core essence. It's my will, this way, that way. They both express me equally. Infinite and finite are equal expressions of God. That's what he's saying then. And that is what we're going to experience then. Hillel focuses on the finite, actualized expression of the divine. And Shammai points us to the surrender to the infinite. And the truth is, infinite is not more of God than finite is. There's no closer, there's no further. It's all him. Ein oid milvadai. Hashem hu elikim. That's what it means. Who is the essence, the yesh? And yud ke vav ke elikim. It's all him. So the ultimate of the mitzvahs will be both Shammai and Hillel. In terms of halacha, the agenda, you can't have it at the same time. You do it this way, you do it that way. Because that's when we're talking about the agenda, fixing. So you got to fix it first this way, and then you this way. First we suffuse the world, and we surrender the world. There are two stages. Up until from the time of the Gemara, from the beginning of time, till Mashiach comes, and then the Messianic era, stages. But post that, when it's all been achieved, mission over, mission accomplished. Now what? Mitzvahs don't exist anymore. The answer is, as commandments, as a need to command, you should do, no longer. But we will naturally just perform mitzvahs spontaneously, both Shammai and Hillel, because they both express the will of God. And how can it be both at the same time? Shalom, peace, which draws on the very essence of God himself. Hashem oiz li'am hayitin, that's the strength that we will get to be able to combine opposites at once. Shammai, Hillel, infinite finite, chesed and gevura at once. It's at once chesed and it's one gevura. So we can't imagine what it's going to look like. How is the mitzvah performed simultaneously in different ways? It will be. But we're going to go beyond the agenda of the mitzvah, just the pure divinity of it. The pure 613 ways that God has chosen to express himself. They're not means by which we've got to accomplish something. That's over. It is the core, pure essence. And this profound teaching that we're struggling with a little bit is what is taught here at the end of the Mishnah. The end of Shas. As if to say it before Mashiach comes. Going through all of them. Now, Chassidus, the Rebbe is revealing the depth of what this Mishnah is saying. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. So that answers all the questions. I will fill your storehouses. If we're getting, I don't want to confuse it with the previous quotes from the other Gemara, but if we're all getting Oim Se Shalach Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem's infinite blessing, you're talking about storehouses being filled. That's finite. Answer is both, the infinite in the finite. The Yesh Amiti will be, will fill the human condition with the infinite and not implode. Why? Because it's the core essence of the mitzvahs will be revealed, which is Hashem himself, the Anoichi, higher than Hashem, Hava Yudke Vavkai, higher than Aleikecha. Again, Hashem Hu Elikim, Yudke Vavkai, Elikim Hu. It's all equal expressions of him. It's all him. From our perspective, infinite is more, finite is less. Shammai is this way, Hillel is that way, and it's a whole, they're in conflict. Better to be born, not better to be born. They're saying opposite things, forbidden, permissible. Then it's going to be, at the same time, forbidden and permissible. Simultaneously. Because it's not about an agenda, so what's it fixing? It's about the pure will. He wants both. It's all equally him, it's all him. Simultaneously. And that's all hinted to in the beautiful words chosen, which were puzzling. Every word of it was puzzling. Of the final statement of the Shas, now it's become eminently and crystal clear. The inheritance, who we inheriting, the very essence of Hashem, as it were. And it's beyond our ken. You can't have two opposites at the same time. It's either Shammai or Hillel. It will be both. Because the Yesh, Lahan Chiloya Ve'yesh, the Yesh Amiti is revealed, bequeathed to us. And why? Because at the end of the day, just to explore this a little bit further, we're inheriting God. What does this mean? That's because the soul is a part of Him. The core of the soul, the neshama, in the immortal words of Rebbe in Tanya, in the beginning of chapter 2, right? You all know it by heart. Every neshama, if you don't learn it, it's a few words, is a chelek aleka mimal mamish. Is verily a part of God above. So since the neshama is rooted in the essence of God, then ultimately the neshama is able to contain opposites, infinite and finite simultaneously. Shammai and Hillel is the pure will of God at once. That's the shalom, the peace, the ultimate peace, the ultimate strength that Hashem grants to His people. All right, friends. So this hopefully is given some measure. Yes? Some measure of insight? Yes, ask a question, Dave.
Is there any specific reason why honey is the last one? Like why specifically honey?
Good question. I don't know. Why this argument of all their arguments? I mean, that's the theme of the tractate. I'm not sure really why honey, but we could suggest why the last tractate deals with the laws of purity and impurity, because at the end, the world will become pure. The world will become pure, so that's the general subject matter. Now that you're asking why honey, it's interesting, yeah, you're making me think of an answer, so thank you for the question. And that is, there are many metaphors for the Torah. It's called milk. It's called obviously water, mayim chayim. Honey is a metaphor for its deepest, sweetest secrets. It might be the most essential level. So that's why honey, because this is a profound, deep insight that reconciles Shammai and Hillel and so on, as we're explaining now, symbolic of honey. What level of Torah are we addressing here? At the very end, the honey dimension. Talmud generally is called water, life-giving water. That says, you want me to add something else, mind you, to your question that you're asking the question. I'm just suggesting maybe, and I thank you for prompting it. Water is necessary, it's functional. It's functional. Without water, you can't survive, things can't grow, you can't live. You can live without honey. So this is what we're saying here. There's a level of mitzvahs up until we've achieved it all, that it's all about functional. You've got to achieve something. It's about your growth, whether the growth is that way or the growth is really to surrender, but it's about arriving at some destination, an agenda, a growth. But honey is pure like luxury. You don't need it for any functional purpose. So it represents the essence of Torah that's beyond agenda. It just is like God is. So perhaps, thank you for asking the question. That's the reason why the last argument, not just purity and impurity, but the idea of honey, which is the deepest level of mitzvahs, which isn't about, if you don't drink it, you're going to die and you're going to grow, you're going to achieve. It's about the pleasure of being, sweetness, experiencing the essence of Hashem. And from that level, Shammai is true and Hillel is true at the same time, infinite, finite, it's all one with Him. These are very, very deep concepts, which Chassidus elaborates upon at length. What is we're going to stop here, it's already formal Shachris time. What is the takeaway? The takeaway is that we have this knowledge now. We're being taught this now. So what it means is this. On the one hand, we have to do mitzvahs. We have to know that we are accomplishing. You're accomplishing. Whether it's the Shammai way, the Hillel way, you're elevating yourself, you're engaging yourself, you're bringing godliness down to the world. That's Hillel. You're surrendering the world. Then you have to have the deepest recognition that it's beyond any accomplishment. It's just pure Hashem Himself. That's got to be a cognizant. You're putting on tefillin, you're keeping Shabbos, We spoke about in the very beginning, we gave Yom Kippur and Purim as like the two quintessential symbolic moments of Judaism. Well, which one is it? They're very different. So Yom Kippur is the Shammai moment, and Hillel and Purim is the Hillel moment. It's all very different, but the core of it all is, it's all you. You're asking me to fast. You're asking me to celebrate. You're asking me to eat, not eat. Morning, night, all of the mitzvahs. Yes, I appreciate, of course, on a conscious level, different messages, different agendas, different stories, different times. Each thing has its time, but the core of it all, it's all you. In fact, this is interestingly enough. The Shulchan Aruch begins with these words: "Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid." I place God before me always. Says the Baal Shem Tov, the word shivisi, I place before me, is the word shava, equal. Equal. That ultimately, it's whatever you want, beyond the gender, it's you. And it's you equally in everything. Whatever the mitzvah might be, it's all at its core. Not about do this so that you will get to, not a means. Mitzvahs at their core are not a means, not as a means to get Gan Eden, not as a means simply to elevate the world. All of the various agendas, and there's agendas and all means and purposes of mitzvah. Mitzvahs are beyond purpose. They are, yes, they're you, period. You've bequeathed those who love you, which is every Jew. Yesh, who's the yesh? The being yourself are in your mitzvah. Beyond a means for an end, which is even after the end has been achieved, we'll still observe them, but not in order to get, we'll go somewhere just as the pure expression of him, and therefore it'll be both at the same time. The stages are over. It's just the pure being of Hashem. And that we have to have an appreciation even now, as you're going to put on our tefillin if you haven't already, or you will, or bracha that you make. It's beyond what does this accomplish. It is you. And I'm connected to you in the deepest way, for this is your will. All right, friends. Next week, we're going to have I'm thinking about a whole different subject. Either you might go into Rashi's analysis of Rashi. What I'm going to try and do is, because this went on for a long time, it's hard to remember from week to week. God willing, it'll be self-contained each week. So we'll have a text, but only the salient, like classic quotations from the Talmud, the Gemara, the Medrash, and all tied all together with the Rebbe's insight, so we complete it in 1 week. Sounds good? I'm working on it, and hopefully for next week, should be very exciting. All right, friends, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Good to see you all.
Shkoyach, Rabbi.
Shkoyach. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Shkoyach, Rabbi.
Be well, everybody.
You too. Good seeing you all. Love you all.